A lot of people in creative professions, and especially in the 3D field, are self-taught. That definitely has its advantages since you learn how to problem solve and also focus on things that interest you the most, but at the same time it can be intimidating and frustrating. A problem that could be complex and hard for you to figure out could be a really simple answer for a teacher or a colleague. And this is the idea behind this video. To learn from artists who were already in your shoes, learn from their mistakes and from the experience they accumulated throughout the years. So, in order to do that, I asked 6 very experienced C4D artists to answer one simple question. What is the one thing you wish you knew when you first started working in 3D and Cinema 4D? It was very interesting to hear their answers, so let's get started. Let's start with an artist with really questionable camera skills, but with artistic skills to compensate for it. Mike Winkelman, or as most people know him, Beeple.
Hey y'all, Mike Beeple here. I'm here to talk about super quick tips that I wish I had known when I started out with Cinema 4D. The first one is the 3 buttons that I wish they were part of the standard interface because they're super useful. One of them is scroll to first active. The other one is the axis center, and the third one is reset PSR. Those buttons you should definitely go into if you go to Windows, customize commands. You can grab those things and put them into the standard interface. Make buttons for those to put them into Cinema 4D because they're super useful. You'll use them every day, especially the scroll to first active. You will constantly be using that. So yeah, that's what I wish I'd known when I first started with Cinema. Peace.
All the commands Mike mentioned are super useful, and especially Axis Center and Reset PSR I use all the time. But even if you don't find these commands useful, just keep in mind that you can customize Cinema to suit your needs. I would say it's one of the very few applications that allow you so much flexibility with tearaway palettes, HUD elements, and modifying the UI in general. But let's move on to our next artist. Orestis is the definition of what a technical director is, but interestingly enough, he didn't choose to focus on a software-specific feature. But he raises some really good points, things that beginners and sometimes even seasoned professionals do when working with a program.
So, what would I say to my younger self? That is a very good question, and not an easy one, because my younger self probably wouldn't follow my advice very much. He wouldn't even recognize me, most likely, because of the different hairstyle, which doesn't make things easier. But I learned a few things during the years, which I would like to tell to my younger self. So here it goes. First thing, try to balance your time, between tutorials or books and actual practice. I learned at some point that the only time you learn something is when you do it. So a tutorial can be a great source of inspiration as well as education. You may see something, understand it, you want to try it, you want to do it, incorporate it in your own project. But unless you do it, you might as well haven't seen the tutorial because you're not going to learn it. The thing is, tutorials are a passive task and doing it is an active task, and you only learn during active task. So try to balance your time. My second advice is something that I'm notoriously bad at, even today, and it is using the right tool for the job. Now, learning a big software like Cinema 4D, which is easy to use, friendly interface, you feel comfortable in there, you don't want to start using this other awkward, difficult software. But the truth is, even though Cinema 4D is great at a lot of things, it can model, sculpt, motion track, render, animate, all of this stuff. There are a lot of things it's not as good at as doing them in other software. And when you have to do these tasks, it's better to just go and do them in the right tool. You shouldn't block your creativity because of the tool. Sculpting in ZBrush can be a totally different experience. You can have a different degree of freedom, or making some advanced shaders in Substance Designer, or making some advanced visual effects with the node interface of Houdini can be totally different and solve your problems and do what you envisioned to do. Now, in terms of difficulty, it's not that big of a problem, I think. The truth is, being in this sector, I like technology, and chances are you also like technology. And by using other software, it's a chance to use very cool technology that exists elsewhere. And if you fire up a few tutorials, I think you can get yourself running and do the tasks you wanted to do. Do yourself a favor and use the right tool for the job.
I'm sure Orestis' points will resonate with a lot of people. To add to his advice about tutorials, I would say use them as a jumping off point. Take the information available and try to see how that technique can work in your own project. Don't focus so much on recreating the artwork used in the tutorial. Just grab the bits of information you need and do something completely different. Something that fits your artistic sensibilities. And since we're in the subject of tutorials, we might as well hear it from the king of Cinema 4D tutorials. He must have produced more than 5 billion hours of tutorials. Noseman, the stage is yours.
When I started doing 3D was actually a very long time ago. Too long, if you ask me. Sometime in the late 80s, so there wasn't much knowledge available anyway. Neither were artist-friendly 3D applications like Cinema 4D. No. Everything was difficult and very rigid. I got more into it and started using 3D in projects sometime in the late 90s, I think. By that time I was introduced to the first version of Cinema 4D as well. And still, there wasn't much around in terms of information. I was actually one of those people that tried to find as much information as possible. Everyone seemed to work under the blanket. You would go to, a TV station where they had these high-end systems and all that, and they would close doors and, put blankets over their heads. Anyway, there wasn't much information coming from that angle, to be honest. What I would have appreciated, had that knowledge been available somewhere, would be the technical side of 3D. What are points, polygons, UVs, materials, shaders, normals? How does rendering work? The more technical things, not extremely technical, not the programming side, but what's actually going on, when we do things. When we weld 2 points, for example, is that 1 point? What is a point? Why is a sphere, smooth and not faceted and all that? Because of the wrong angles and so forth. So, that would be stuff that I would find extremely interesting, because it's very hard to come up with these things or understand them unless someone tells you about them. I was sort of a genius at the traditional printing processes, and having that deep knowledge of printing, film, halftones, color separation, contact photography, and so on, was one of the main reasons that allowed me to become quite proficient in Photoshop and Illustrator. So the equivalent now would be the underlying technologies of 3D that would have allowed me to be better and have, an easier, let's say, journey through the world of 3D. Well, as you may know, that's a big part of what I teach. So in hindsight, I should have time traveled to today to get some advice from myself, my now self. But I think I wouldn't have told my young me to do 3D. I would have told me to bet a lot of money that Greece would win the 2004 Euro Championship in football, soccer as it's known, in the colonies, buy Bitcoin in 2008 and sell it in 2018, and of course sell my flat and buy Apple stock back in 2007. But hey, I know now.
I wish we all knew about these things. And now that you got your Greek fix with 3 Greeks back to back, let's switch it up a little bit and move to our next artist. Marijn is a rendering expert and has some of the most beautiful renders done with Cinema 4D. He is also one of the few people who still use Cinema's internal render engines.
One of the big revelations for me when I started out with 3D rendering was the use of tone mapping. If we go into the simple interior scene and render it out with a standard HDRI file, you'll see that it's too dark. So because of the small window, there's just not a lot of light coming in, and we need to increase the brightness or exposure for that HDR file. So if we render this out again with a higher exposure, you'll see that the overall look of the image is a lot better, but because the outside is so bright, we get these very bright, ugly highlights near the window. And this is always the case, especially with interiors, but basically in any situation where you have a lot of contrast between bright light and a more dimmed light. So in this case, what you want to do is enable some sort of tone mapping to bring down those highlights. And the oldest way to do that inside Cinema 4D is to use the color mapping post effect. And if we render this out now, you'll see that we basically get the same image we had before, but those bright highlights have been toned down to a much nicer looking image. So as you can see here, this is the old version and this is the version with tone mapping. So this is a very important effect, and often people complain about the physical render just not looking very nice out of the box, which is true because this is what you get out of the box. And it's very important to know that you need to turn on at least a simple exponential filter to bring down those highlights. Most third-party engines, they just enable this by default, so when you hit render in a standard scene, you already get these kind of nice tone mapping effects. Of course, if you are rendering out an animation or something like that, it's always better to just render to 32-bit and do these kind of post effects in your compositing software like After Effects or Fusion, where you have more control, and that way you don't need to re-render your scene.
This is a really cool tip, and I would also encourage you to use more of Cinema's post effects in general. My personal favorite is the color correction post effect. You can easily transform a render just by adjusting colors, levels, and contrast. To have a more interactive experience with that post effect, you can go to the Filter tab in the picture viewer and start grading the image even while rendering. Once you're done, you can save these adjustments as a post effect. I use this all the time, and you can see its power in one of my scenes available in the content browser. If I render the image without the color correction, it looks like this. But now if I enable the post effect and render again, you can see that the image is completely transformed. But enough with that. Let's move on to our next set of artists. Both of them have produced some incredible work with Cinema 4D, and interestingly enough, they share the same tip, and I must say I agree with them 100%. Let's hear it from EJ first.
So I think the one major thing that I would offer up as advice to anyone who's new to 3D, Cinema 4D, whatever, just 3D in general, would be to spend a lot more time on learning the fundamentals if you don't know them already. I feel like a lot of people that jump into 3D are doing so being self-taught, like myself, and you want to run towards all of the shiny, sexy features, and you really don't know how to animate, you really don't know about color theory, you don't really know all about those fundamentals, right? So I think that is the most important thing, because I feel like when I started out, I focused way too much on technical things and not so much on fundamental things that, you know, like color theory, lighting. Just lighting is a huge one in 3D. And I just spend so much time on technical things that, you know, are eventually going to get automated anyway. So, you know, with each upgrade, things become easier and easier, less technical. So you can't really hang your hat up on those kind of super technical advanced things. I mean, even rendering at this point is becoming so much easier. Where you can really stand apart from is not your technical prowess, but your individual style in your mastery of those fundamentals. So that's my big thing. That's something I struggle with to this day that I'm continuing to improve on all the time. So hopefully that helps all of you newcomers to 3D.
As I mentioned before, I could not agree more with what EJ is saying. Knowing, for example, what makes a good composition or using colors effectively can have a great impact in your artwork. It can transform a really mediocre scene from a technical point of view to a really beautiful image. But let's hear what Tim has to say about this. Tim Clapham is one of the best C4D artists out there and shares EJ's thoughts about learning the fundamentals.
Focus on learning the right skills. Which is a bit vague considering the question, but let me try and put that into context for you. When I first started out, we shot stop motion using film cameras and we developed the film. We also worked with video, and we were using video cameras and videotapes and editing on a 3-machine edit suite. Now, of course, technology changes so fast, it's kind of impossible to know what's coming next, and computers came along and they revolutionised the whole industry. But one thing that didn't really change are the core skills that you need in this industry, and I think they are things like understanding colour, balance, layout, structure. When you look at a painting by an artist, you don't think, what type of paint did he use, or who made his paintbrush? You look at the painting and you judge it on what you can see in front of you for its merits. You should do the same with digital work. You shouldn't really think, oh, what application did they use? What renderer were they using? You should think, what makes this piece of work successful?
I really like what Tim said here. When you look at a painting, you don't ask what colors or what paintbrush the artist used. You just focus on the actual artwork, how much it moved you, how beautiful it is. It shouldn't be any different with digital art. And with that nice little thought, we reach the end of this video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.